So, how to bind. You probably already know how to bind, and I'm not trying to teach you something that's too different. What I want to teach you is how to bind properly and why that is binding properly and why you should do it that way. So the idea is, it's a bit like this, my throwing video. I don't need you, or I don't think it's necessary to kind of practice, have a dedicated time to just practice throwing or binding. I don't think you should just sit there throwing and binding. But every time you do other practices, then you could end with a bind with a conscious effort of making a nice clean bind. So say right now you're practicing a trapeze, you're practicing your undermount, you're practicing a trapeze, and then you can bind in a nice clean way. So I'm going to teach you 2 binds because, to be honest, that's all you need to know. And then from then on, whenever you feel the need, you can start experimenting with different binds. But they all kind of work off the back of the same theory, I guess. So this is what the front bind looks like. And this is what the side bind looks like. Oops. So let's do that again. And then in. And that's literally it. So how bind works is you have a bearing here. And then the bearing is 2 actual circles. And then there's a ball bearing in between 2 circles. And then they spin independently of each other. So when the string is attached to the bearing, the outside of the bearing doesn't really move. The inside of the bearing is what's attached to the yo-yo, and that all spins around, which makes sense, right? So what happens to the bind is you're putting enough string in there to kind of wrap around the bearing and start touching the response pads. And when it starts biting into the response pad, the yo-yo keeps spinning and wraps the string around the yo-yo. So when you bind, what's happening is you're kind of feeding that string. Can you see the string starting to wrap around the bearing and the axle until it bites and then it wraps all the way around. Things you want to avoid is things like this, having a tail and having a snaggy bind. So why you don't want to have a tail? Let me try and get a tail. This is a snaggy bind. Let me see if I can get a tail to form. Not very good at doing a messy bind. Perfect. Okay, so I have got a tail to form like this, and I will be able to explain to you why you get a tail, and why you should avoid it. I'm trying from this side. Okay, so you got a tail, and then why you want to avoid it is you want as much of the string as it unwinding the yo-yo as possible. So if you can imagine it, the longer the string, the more powerful your throw is theoretically, because you have that much more string creating more momentum and spinning the yo-yo. It's like a spinning top. So if you just had a short string and you'd like to do a little flick spin, the spinning top will kind of spin for a certain amount of time. But if you have a really long string and you're like kind of whipping and unwinding the whole entire length of the string, that spinning top will be spinning more powerful. So same thing with this. So with a tail, what's happening is, see, the yo-yo is unwinding. Normally up to here is all good. Up to here is all good. And then you get to tail segment where all this string here is not unwinding the yo-yo, it's just dead string, and then it carries on unwinding. So you're missing out on all that additional, say if this is the amount of power you can apply to the string, that's a yo-yo, you're missing out on like a huge percentage of it. And that's why you don't want to bind with a tail and get a nice clean bind. Oops. And the second thing is, there's one direction. Oh my god, I am doing a how to bind video and I can't even bind. So there's a certain direction that you can bind in, or to be honest, you can bind in both directions. So front style, you should bind this way, but if you went into the opposite way, you could get it to bind, but then you probably have those kind of snaggy binds or with a tail. So the reason is yo-yo is spinning one way, and then you want to bind in that way so that the string wraps up in that way. So if you're binding in the opposite way, because you're putting the string in, at first it will start winding one direction, and then the rest of the strings will wind the opposite direction. So what you end up getting is a yo-yo that's coming out, and then halfway through unwinding, the rest of the string just stops. It's a little bit like having a tail. If anything, it's pulling the yo-yo back, whereas it's trying to unwind the opposite way. So let me see if I could get it to bind like that. So you can see the yo-yo, its string is releasing nice and steadily, and then it gets to a point where it should start unwinding in the opposite direction now. Do you see that? So you want to avoid that. You want the whole entire length of the string to keep unwinding the same direction so you don't miss out on that power potential. And also, by having it unwinding in multiple directions, that's when you get snags. Snags are, let me try and get it in intentional snag. How can I do this? So snags are when you have a bind when it doesn't come out clean. Oh, no, that's not the one. Okay, so snags are when you have a bind, it doesn't come out clean because it's going one direction, and then as it's rotating in one direction, and then now it tries to unwrap the another direction, or there's a string wrapped around. For whatever reason, it's causing, it's just causing the yo-yo to not unwind in a clean, uniform direction. So it stops it and it snags it and then it binds back up. So this is probably what's going to happen. Oh. Oh. So you need to clear that snag. So ideally, you don't want to have any snag, and you want to have a nice clean throw every time so you can be confident and throw it. But just in case, whenever sometimes you bind and you feel like, oh, that doesn't feel like a clean bind, then you might want to have a little safety throw just to make sure that it comes out cleanly. Because you don't want to do a big powerful throw and then it just comes straight back at your head. So let me just try and do. Okay, so this is a snaggy bind. Oh. Okay. This is what's going to happen if you don't do a safety throw. So if you ever think, oh, I think that bind is a little bit sketchy, it's better to. I think that's a clean one. It's better to just throw it out, check it's clean, and if it's not, just clear that and then do a nice clean bind so you know that this throw is going to be nice and clean. Okay, so how to bind. See, this is a bit snaggy. That's just to clean it out to make sure that you know you have a clean bind. After you hit yourself once or twice, yeah, it'll become second nature. So when it's binding, what you don't want to do, and this is very easy to do without even realizing, and this is probably the whole point of the whole entire video, actually. So what a lot of people do is, see this tail? They whip it into the, okay, let me just grab it a bit lower. They whip it into the yo-yo, like this. They whip it into the yo-yo, and then this whole thing wraps around and it becomes like a mess where it's probably snaggy. And also, even if it wasn't, it would have, let me try and clear this. It would have wound up in a, yeah, anyway. So you don't want to have a snaggy bind because it's dangerous as well, and dangerous to you, and you could end up damaging the yo-yo if it comes out weird and it starts hitting stuff. So don't put the tail into the yo-yo. That's what you don't want to do. So what you want to avoid is doing something like this, where you end up with a tail, and that also means that not all the string is unwinding. It's helping you unwind the yo-yo. So So you want it to have the entire length of the string winding up in a uniform tight manner. So don't throw the tail, but then how do you bind? If anything, you're kind of doing the opposite. You're throwing it more this way. And then the reason for this is, oops, I managed to wrap my string around the yo-yo. Give me 1 second. So what's happening when you bind, I'm not sure if I already showed this on camera, but so when you bind, you are kind of just raising your hand this way and then lowering your hand this way. So let me try and do it on a dead yo-yo. So what you're trying to do essentially is this hand with the tail, you're kind of lowering it, and then this hand that's attached to your hand, you're raising it, and then that causes the string to wrap around, and then once it bites, you actually, instead of flicking the string into the gap, you're actually flicking it away from the gap, and what this causes is, so now all the string that's all wrapped up is wrapped up in a uniform direction, and then the yo-yo will continue to climb, and there will be no tail. So see, if you put the string into the gap, even if it's just a little bit, because the yo-yo is winding up this way, the tail will get consumed into the yo-yo, right? Whereas if you were to whip the tail away, then so if you are to whip the tail away, the yo-yo will just continue to wind. Can you see? So if you whip the tail into the gap, as the yo-yo winds, the whole tail, both these double string, gets wound up into the gap, which is not what you want. You want to kind of whip it out this way, so that as the yo-yo continues to bind, it's a nice, clean, uniform bind. And then the way to do that is actually rather simple. So what you're not trying to do is this. So coming out this way, see that sound is yo-yo slipping on the strings. It's to kind of whip it past the yo-yo, and think of it, if the yo-yo is here, your hand is going past it. You don't stop at the yo-yo, you just move all the way past it. So here, you pinch the string. Let me actually do it from this side. So here, you pinch this string. What I normally do is just put my thumb over the top of that string. This hand moves up, this hand feeds down, and then you move past it, past the yo-yo. So let's just do that properly, like how you normally do it. So like that. So your hand's kind of moving past. You're just putting the tail. So what's happening is, so if I was just get a dead yo-yo so it doesn't spin, you're doing this. You're kind of doing like this, and then when it starts biting, it's about to fall. It's difficult to keep a dead yo-yo straight. So when it starts biting, you just flick it out, in a sense. That's not quite what you're doing, but that's the feeling that you want to have in your mind. So, like this. See how my hand moves past it? So the front style is like that. It's quite simple. You could do it this way, but I want you to try and practice doing it this way. So what you would normally do, hop the yo-yo up. I wouldn't recommend going past this way, so your throw hand being lower than the tail, because that is likely to give you a tail or not have a clean bind. About equal is good. and then you pinch, and then your hand goes in the opposite direction, and then your non-throw hand carries on going forward, your throw hand carries on going up, and then you catch the yo-yo. So the thing that you can kind of change, it depends on how fast the yo-yo is spinning, and also it depends on how thick your string is. What's the yo-yo's response like? So some yo-yos can be determined as snaggy, and snaggy is when you don't want it to bind, but in midst of the trick, you find the yo-yo kind of catching the pad and binding before you actually meant to bind. And then some yo-yos, for some reason, maybe it's the response pads or the gap widths or whatever, you want it to bind, and then but then you end up having like a yo-yo that, okay, this yo-yo is actually pretty good at binding. So you have a yo-yo that doesn't really bind as snappily as you want it to be. So depending on the yo-yo, if it's a yo-yo that's not binding as well, or if you don't have a lot of spin. So, okay, so let me just drop it. So if it's a really slow yo-yo and then you want the yo-yo to do as less work as possible, then you might want to have your hand a bit higher up than your throw hand. It could be evil, but the longer you have it, the easier it's going to bind, but it might not bind cleanly. And then sometimes, if the yo-yo is spinning too hard, if you give it too much tail, it might come back at like a surprising rate. So if it's a stronger throw, you might want to give it a shorter tail. So it really depends on what kind of throw it is. But a great way to start, and just a rule of thumb, is to kind of have it about equal level. And that's the thing you want to aim for. Sometimes, especially if it's a weaker throw, a small tail might not be enough. See? But if it's halfway, it might just about be enough, but you see, it ran out of steam as it came up and it kind of stalled around here. So on a weaker throw, you might want to have a longer tail. Oops, sorry, I ended up hitting the yo-yo. So on a weaker throw, let's try that again. You might want to have a bit of a longer tail to try and give that more string to grab onto. On a harder throw, what happens is if you have a longer tail, the amount of time it takes from the bind to your hand is much shorter. So if it's going really fast, from here to bam, and you're like, oh, it might be more difficult to catch. So, and it will come back at more force to your hand, and it will hurt your hand. So for a stronger throw, you might want to just give it a small tail. But seriously, just experiment. But rule of thumb, for now, just have it at equal height, and that's the best way to do it. So your hand with your pinch is kind of like it's going straight down, but more on this side rather than this side. Yeah, and then for the side start, it's exactly the same. Once you can get into the undermount, you're doing the same thing. And that's really it for binding. Oops. All other kind of binds that you see operate off the same principle, you're just doing it in a different place. So for now, all you should really worry about, front style binds, side style binds. And that's really it. I don't think there's really anything much more I can tell you about binding. Yeah. There's one thing I want to mention actually, because this is something that I try to practice, put into practice. And this is probably not something that you can do right now, and you can try actually, and I think it'll be really good practice. It's like basically a philosophy that I go by, and it's helped me a lot. So when I watch a lot of people learn how to yo-yo, practicing yo-yo, they'll have a trick that they're learning right now. Say it's double or nothing. Double or nothing is your trick. They'll throw, do one double or nothing, and then they'll bind. And then they'll throw, do double or nothing, and then they'll bind. The thing is, you want to be able to get used to, for bind purposes, you want to be able to get used to binding at more of a powerful throw, and you want to be able to get used to being able to have almost no spin left in the yo-yo, but still be able to bind. And then the only way you can do that is to have different ends of the spectrum. So binding when it's a powerful throw, you don't need to worry about too much because you will be doing that so many times. Say, for example, you want to shoot a video, then you start doing your trick, and then you go, I messed up somehow. Let's say I didn't quite get it in the way I wanted to. Let's retake the video, and then you'll have to bind earlier on, or for whatever reason, there will be loads of time when you want to bind earlier than you normally would. But having a weak throw bind, it's a great practice, and also I think it's for long-term benefits. It's great to practice and see how weak you can wait until you can bind. So like, let me try and slow the yo-yo down a bit. That's almost dying. Let's slow it down a little bit more. And you should still be able to bind it. And also this helps in creativity. So what I want to get at, so let me just get to the point first. Try and maximize your throw. When I say maximize your throw, I don't mean try to do the strongest throw possible every single time, but try and maximize your throw every single time, as in from the throw to the bind, try and hold out until the very last minute. When you think, okay, any longer now, I won't have enough spin left to bind. So if you're doing a trick, say you're learning double or nothing, instead of just doing one double or nothing and then going straight into the bind, because then there's still so much power left in that yo-yo that you're just wasting. Firstly, you're wasting time and you're kind of hindering your creativity, because all you're doing is, okay, I'm learning this trick, I did this trick, let's bind. I'm doing this trick again, you're practicing that way. Later when you want to create more combo and get like better and more flow, the only way you can do that is really just by practicing. And then the best way to practice is practice without meaning to practice. So say you're doing double or nothing, and so far you learned your trapeze and stuff. You might want to try bouncing up and down. Okay, and then go into a double or nothing. Okay, and then maybe do a bit more bouncing up and down. Okay, and then do a bit of brother. And then you're going back into double or nothing. Just keep going with that spin until you think, okay, that yo-yo is about to die. And then you bind. So later on, the more tricks you know, you might just carry on adding on things to... So say for example, I want to do double or nothing, matrix, the combo that I want you to work towards. And then say you finish the combo and you finish the combo and you're like, oh, this yo-yo is still spinning. Okay, let me just add on another trick to the end of that. Oops. Sorry, I need to get better at talking and yo-yoing at the same time as well. So you have done the combo, and instead of just stopping where you feel like, okay, I've done what I wanted to achieve, then from then on, just play, just experiment, just like play around with different tricks. Why am I? And just kind of keep adding on. Okay, it's still got some spin left. Now the yo-yo is almost about to die. And then you bind. So you want to try and maximize that spin as much as possible. Just keep going. Just keep adding things on, even if it's just doing the same thing over and over again. Just go, okay, I've done my double nothing. Let's just keep going until I feel like I need to bind. And then try and bind. And then next time, try and delay that a little bit more. Sometimes it's okay to, let me just try and do it really slow, so it doesn't last a long time. So sometimes it's okay to just keep going until it dies, and then you'll know, okay, that's the kind of point where I shouldn't go beyond. Is it almost dead? Yeah. And then you just keep going and go, oh, that yo-yo's died. And then try to save it maybe. Nope. And then you're like, okay, so that's kind of like what it feels like when it goes past the point where I can't bind anymore. But next time try again anyway, because maybe your binds have improved and that point where you can't bind parts anymore actually moves a little bit. So that's a long video about bind for you.